everybody, and welcome again to Blogging Heads. I'm Eli Lake of the New York Sun, and I'm joined with Matthew Lee of Inner City Press. How are you, Matthew?
I'm doing pretty well. I'm okay.
Okay, well, before we get this started, I should tell Blogging Heads viewers who are used to seeing me smoking on screen that I've quit, or I'm quitting. So the only thing you're going to see me smoking is a cinnamon stick, and that's what this is, a cinnamon stick.
Okay.
And I'm chewing some nicotine gum. So there you go. I'm
right.
a little jumpy. Have a heart.
He was going to be chewing tobacco, but we decided to not go that route, you know?
All right. So let's get started. You were at the United Nations until 11 p.m. last night. Is that correct?
That's correct. Not only I was. That's not that infrequent. It's not as infrequent as it should be. But in fact, the whole Security Council was here until at least 10:30 when they voted on a Darfur-related resolution.
Mm. And this is interesting because the issue of Omar Bashir, the leader of Sudan, who has been indicted, or I guess recommended to be indicted for the International Criminal Court, came up in what would have been a routine resolution. Am I correct? On that sort of
rolling over the mandate. Yep.
Rolling over the mandate for the African Union peacekeeping force in Darfur. And so tell us then what happened.
Okay, because this peacekeeping mission it's an African Union / UN peacekeeping mission. It's all widely described. It'll be the largest ever, although only like a third of the soldiers have arrived. But when it was created, it was set to expire by its terms yesterday, end of July, and so it had to be renewed. 2 weeks before the renewal came up, the International Court Criminal Court prosecutor Luis Moreno Campo made a request to the judges to get an arrest warrant against the president of Sudan for genocide, war crimes, allowing rapes to occur, a pretty heady mix of crimes. And the fight back from not only Sudan, but they've managed to get these groupings of I guess third world, developing world. The African Union, it was the thing at issue, but they also got the Arab League and this, in fact, a very large group that I think, Eli, you probably may not be a fan of, the Non-Aligned Movement, which claims to represent well over 100 countries. And this will come up. And so all three of these groupings have said that the indictment is they've said it in different ways. Unhelpful, won't lead to peace in Darfur, and should be frozen for a year, which the Rome Statute of the ICC allows for. So the whole thing that came up, and it was what's interesting is that the U.S. sort of came up with its objections at the end, because there had been a negotiation for about a week here, and as reporters we're always like standing outside rooms trying to find out. And Sudan and its people, so they had people operating on their behalf, but the Sudanese ambassador was at all these meetings. Sudan had sort of agreed essentially with the UK, which was the sponsor of the resolution, to put in a paragraph taking note of the decision by the African Union to take a close look at the indictment and maybe freeze it. Not actually freezing anything, but putting in there that they took note of that and would consider it at a later time. And it seemed actually, as the week began, it seemed that Sudan thought they could actually get like a freeze, but that wasn't really realistic. But they may have made a mistake by like 2 days before the vote saying they were happy to get this paragraph in, because the night of the vote, the meeting was supposed to be at 3 p.m. The mandate expires at midnight. At 3 p.m. they say no, come back at 5, and everyone basically, it's like the U.S. is trying to get some last minute changes. Or maybe some people were saying, Condi Rice or this guy Rich Williamson, who's the U.S. main envoy to Sudan, that at the last second they somehow had objections to the paragraph. I find it hard to believe, but they played it right down to the wire. And then we were there all night with the U.S. calling Washington, then the U.S. was trying to convince countries just extend it for a day so we can have more time to change the paragraph. So I'm sorry, I don't want to go up.
No.
This is just the factual stuff. Then we'll get into
what is the U.S. mission saying about this?
What they said, and they literally only came out with this through their spokesman like yesterday afternoon around 5 o'clock, was that including that paragraph, quote, sends the wrong message to President Bashir. Basically, it gives him hope that he could get away with genocide.
Well, this is fairly significant. As somebody who's covered these diplomatic issues from Washington, because of course the Bush administration has not even sought ratification in the Senate of the ICC treaty, which was signed at the end of the... You remember when they sent at the time our ambassador for war crimes, but Pierre Prosper has not... In fact, we even had a policy for a period where we were encouraging states...
not to sign.
Well, not only not to sign, we were telling states that, in order to get kind of benefits from the big U.S. power, we wanted you to sort of have this exception that you would agree never to send American soldiers in your it's called an Article 33 exception, I think.
Correct. Yep.
So the Bush administration has been kind of interested in many ways undermining the International Criminal Court, but in this particular case, they want the International Criminal Court to kind of be the vehicle in some ways of regime change because, of course, Omar Bashir is the head of the state of Sudan, right?
No, you're absolutely.
So what a pickle. On the one hand, I love regime change.
Right.
On the other hand, I don't trust these European, justices with this International Criminal Court. What's a neoconservative to do?
The thing is that, as you know, very well put. The thing is that obviously it's not either or. If you the proponents of regime change, even if you like the ICC as a component of your strategy, the U.S. is never limited, as we know, to a single strategy. But the thing is, I don't want to undercut the news value of what happened last night, except to say this horse left the barn in 2005 when the Security Council voted, without the U.S. objecting to it, to refer the situation in Darfur, Sudan, to the ICC for investigation.
Right.
This is when people look at it now. Now it's pretty clear that both China and Russia are very much against this indictment, and they'd like to freeze it. But if any one of U.S., UK, or France remains opposed to to putting it on hold, it's going to go forward, and it's and that's,
right.
Which doesn't mean he'll be arrested. He may just stop leaving his country, But the thing is, I bet you it's clear now that China and Russia kicked themselves for not having vetoed the referral to the ICC, because since Sudan is not a party to the ICC, the only way they're able to be investigated is because the Security Council referred the case. And I think in terms of, let me just take up the cause of the third world here, Eli, just to stoke you up.
The non-aligned movement, neither free nor Soviet.
No, but actually, I think this is an unassailable logic. The issue is, and Sudan raises it, but that doesn't necessarily make it wrong, is that if non-parties, I think you're probably a property rights guy, so which means you shouldn't be subject to a law you didn't agree to, right? So why should Sudan be subject to the ICC if it didn't agree? Okay, they write a statute and they say, well, if the Security Council refers it, then you're subject, because you're a member of the UN, which they are. But the thing about this loophole is that the 5 countries that have vetoes will never refer themselves. By the way, being in favor of
property rights means I don't want some revolutionary junta taking the land my has been in my family for 5 generations.
No, but doesn't it mean more fundamentally, sort of like you're only subject? Maybe I'm talking about natural law or natural rights.
Oh yeah, I'm a Lockean.
Okay,
yes,
right.
Sure.
You're only if you didn't agree to this compact. So I think you have to at least agree with Sudan on this one. They are not parties to the thing, right?
Right.
So how in what name are they being indicted?
Well,
by?
I'm not really taking up the case of the ICC. I think there are a lot of problems with it myself, precisely for that reason, which is that states that are probably most likely to have heads of state or officials that are going to be candidates for the International Criminal Court will also likely not join, and if they do join, their word will be as good as their word on other kind of agreements of international law. So I have some issues with it as well, probably coming at it from a different perspective. That said, you use the international system you have.
No, sure, but I guess that's all I'm saying. I'm saying there is this, because I was thinking, for example, the situation in Myanmar, which we may be discussing in a bit, or in North Korea. The issue, or in Sri Lanka, for that matter, or a variety of countries that haven't joined the ICC. The thing is, they still could be prosecuted if someone would refer it. So basically, the only countries that the ICC can't get at are the 5 that have vetoes, and you may assume that 3 of those 5 would never commit a wrong. I don't know what you think of France's foreign policy. Do you think that France might be a good subject for?
When the French left Algiers, they bombed all the power lines.
Right,
they were the worst, by the way. The French are the worst colonizers. FYI, the French and the Belgians, all the continental Europeans.
You won't find it. Having gone to Chad earlier this summer and seeing France's handiwork, you won't find a big disagreement on my behalf.
And they love to lecture people, by the way.
Right.
Hubert Védrine and these other, they love to lecture the rest of the world.
No, Chad.
Take a look at the Euro France.
Right. No. Oh, absolutely. Djibouti as well, but that's another story. But the other. So basically, you're protected if either you're one of the permanent 5 or you have one of the permanent 5 behind you. Here, let me throw a little meat your way.
Yeah.
Israel, for example.
Yeah.
Or on the other hand, you could say China probably would have reflexively done a veto for Myanmar.
What did Israel? But Israel, incidentally, had an interest in retroactive justice in the early years of its statehood, right?
Okay.
And what did they do? Well, they sent out trained operatives to Argentina, and they snatched the guys themselves.
Right.
Eichmann in Jerusalem.
Sure.
Made possible, you could argue, right?
Go ahead.
I would argue a piece of sort of international justice. That was a good thing, but made possible by the doings or sort of the unofficial doings of the Israelis. I don't know what the official status of it was, but I know that they did not coordinate the extradition of Eichmann with the Argentine government, I'm pretty sure.
We can call it universal jurisdiction at the point of the gun,
Yeah.
It's like these judges in Spain that try to indict.
Right, but they didn't make a big show of referring it to them. They took care of it. They took care of it themselves.
Right.
Yeah.
No. Well, I mean, yeah. So I mean, that's the thing with Bashir. Actually, there's two things that may. One thing is.
By the way, there's a similar thing that goes on with Mengistu, who is surprise, living in the Zimbabwe capital of Harare.
Correct.
Every year, there's some ritual where Ethiopians have a. I guess they make a pilgrimage down there and they try to kill him.
Right.
Now, I mean, obviously, it hasn't been that successful yet. But, ex-dictators usually, especially we have most example of the sort of African strongman.
Right.
But, when usually they kind of work out some deal where they kind of live in isolation, but in at least relatively speaking, extraordinary luxury compared to the people that they oppressed and, usurped property and power from. But there is always the sense of sort of justice and vengeance. Now, I'm not saying, obviously, it would be wonderful if you could sort of figure all this out in some sort of court. I just don't think the world is there yet.
Right. No,
listen, I want to make it very clear to the Blogginghouse viewers. I am not necessarily advocating
seizing people.
Well, vigilante revenge killings as a tool of international justice.
Where do you
I'm not saying that that's the way to go. All I'm saying is that justice isn't sometimes what you make it.
Right.
And that's true.
Sure. There's actually two. I'm trying to think. There a couple of things came to mind, but one, rather than I'll throw this one out there just because it's a factoid, and that's what I love.
Yeah.
And there was an incident in Kosovo. It would happen on March 17th of this year, where the UN itself, through its forces, tried to retake a courthouse in North Kosovo from Kosovar Serbs who had taken it over in anger at the Unilateral Declaration of Independence. A report has come out, very hush-hush in the UN, saying that the UN screwed up, shouldn't have used force, inappropriate use of force, used unverified intelligence, didn't bring medical assistance. And so yesterday the Russian ambassador called for personal accountability for the UN person, Larry Rossin, an American, the deputy top envoy to Kosovo at the time, who had ordered the assault on the courthouse. And no one could figure out, the guy's already left the UN system, but he's probably immune for what he did when he was at the UN. I bring it up just because it's a small thing. It's sort of like, could the UN itself engage in war crimes? I don't think that's what Turkin's alleging, but he's saying personal accountability. And so our joke was like if he better watch out if he ever eats sushi. You know what I mean?
Why?
No, because the radioactive sushi. Maybe I'm not saying it's that funny. It's a lot of setup. But it's sort of a modern version of Eichmann
the state
in
of
Jerusalem.
Russia, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I mean,
such
that
binders of international law. That's another thing, by the way.
Go ahead.
I'm a little sick and tired of countries that do not really follow international law at all,
invoking it.
And just and getting on their high horse about Bush and the war criminals and everything like that.
Right.
So
the U.S. was thundering about genocide and war crimes yesterday. FYI.
Maybe but I mean, they do have a point on the facts of it. Omar Bashir had his government cooperate with these Janjaweed, who probably were drawn from recruited in some ways by the Sudanese intelligence service, and they went and fouled wells with the dead bodies of 16-year-olds.
It's absolutely outrageous. I don't disagree. But let me just ask you. Let me just throw one word at you: Contras.
Yeah. Contras. Did you read my piece in the New Republic?
I'm not throwing the word ill-advisedly. Okay, so we can move on. Moving on.
Well, but Contras, but Contras were nothing like the Janjaweed. Come on.
No, they didn't have camels.
No, but it wasn't like that either. Contras did. Come on, that's not even close. And those mines in the harbor, by the way, they were like firecracker mines. They weren't like real mines.
They killed people. They killed school teachers that were teaching people how to read.
Go back to that incident. Those mines were meant to largely startle people.
I'm not talking about the big picture incident. I'm talking about a campaign in the hills of Nicaragua to kill progressive young people who were trying to teach peasants to read. And you can say that that's just a myth, but it's happened. There was a strategy of trying to...
They were fighting the Sandinistas.
And so it was
who
fair...
seized power by revolution. And by the way, a lot of Contras were ex-Sandinistas, and the Sandinistas killed lots of people too. It was a nasty little war.
Right, but what I'm saying, the analogy I was drawing is not the volume of people killed, but the use of a proxy force to terrorize civilians to accomplish a goal. No?
I don't think the Contras were necessarily terrorizing civilians, though I know at the time that there were incidents of that, and like any particular, but the intention of the Janjaweed in many ways, it's a very different kind of thing. And besides, the Nicaraguans ultimately voted out the Sandinistas when there was finally a free election in '91.
But okay, I mean, I thought we would because the theory
we're going to disagree on this.
No, forget. I'm moving past the Contras to say, I mean, and you know, the theory of some of the people that have expressed concerns about this indictment, this attempt to indict. Let's just call it the indictment. Well, he's asked for an arrest warrant, so we'll call it an indictment. That is, and this was actually a concern expressed by, this is what's so funny, by the U.S.'s envoy, Rich Williamson. Before it was announced, he was asked point blank, I was there, whether he thought this would be a good idea. And he said, well, let me be clear, we don't try to interfere in the ICC, we don't believe in impunity. However, we think these things should be looked at very closely. He was, more so than the U.K. and France, kind of expressing caution about the indictment. That's what's, I have to say, something, I'm doing the reporting from here, so I like anything that moves in the UN I look at, but somebody needs to see what happened in Washington that...
Yeah, no, I'm going to look into that.
Okay, check that out, because their position changed on it in the last month. It went from saying maybe he shouldn't indict between the lines to standing more extreme or more, you know, whatever you want to call it, more pure.
You should indict, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. They really, and the thing last night, and this is why what was so interesting is like the question became, so as the night got longer, it was clear, the U.S. was saying we want to change that paragraph. That didn't seem like it was going to happen. Then they said we want to come up with another paragraph that maybe they were trying to peel the UK and France back to their side. You see what I mean? Come up with something that Sudan wouldn't like, but the UK and France would like.
Yeah.
So then they wanted time, but then Russia and others said, you can't have time. You know it, because the threat was sort of, here was the thing, and this is why it's, and maybe it's the same thing in Congress, but it's even more so at the UN. Like, it was important that it be unanimous. Even the U.S. said, we don't want to send the wrong message.
In the UN Security Council, but
yeah, they wanted it to be 15-0, because these peacekeepers are out there getting shot at. You know what I mean? The more... Even for Bashir to be able to say, hey, the mandate for this mission isn't even unanimous. You know what I mean? It's a contentious. So they wanted, so the U.S., in a way, its threat to the other members was, we're going to abstain. You know, if you don't change it, we're going to abstain. And it's like, basically their bluff was called. People were like, go ahead and abstain. And I think, I just want to turn it, we didn't talk, actually, since this double veto for sanctions on Mugabe. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was like a big thing, too. And the U.S. was trying to kind of isolate either China or Russia. But as it turned out, I really don't think that was the effect. Basically, it showed that there were 6 countries that didn't agree with sanctions on Zimbabwe, and 2 of them are permanent members. Now, to you might say, well, all 6 are rogues. But over here in UN land, you're not isolating anybody when they have 5 friends.
That doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, the Chinese and the Russians have an interest to stifle any kind of action from the United Nations that would punish a state for the abrogation of the political democratic process, or for that matter, on serious kind of human rights abuses, because both the Chinese and the Russian states regimes are built in some ways on at least the intimidation of their people and then the undermining of any kind of democratic system. And we saw the process in Russia in the last few years, sadly, with the assault on a free press there.
Yep.
And the assault on any kind of opposition political parties. And on China, by the way, is a very different story, because they're coming from Maoist, totalitarian system, and they've certainly economically liberalized. But we've also seen that, the great hope for China in the Clinton years, that engagement would also lead to democratization, really hasn't come in. Some of it is at a local level, but not as much. And they've shown themselves as international actors to have an interest in sort of having and drawing the line at egregious outlier examples in weak states like Zimbabwe, to make sure that it never catches up to them. So that basically they have an interest, in my estimation, this gets us into a larger question, that the UN can never fulfill the element of its charter that enumerates the rights of individuals and how societies ought to be organized, and is only kind of a body that kind of preserves the state system that includes open and closed societies, and that will always sort of be that way.
Right.
Do you agree with that?
No. I'm sorry. The logic was so breathtaking. I didn't follow it through at all. Actually, there was somebody knocking on my door. But I feel like the one thing. I'm sorry to not engage you directly on that one. First, I just wanted to say I don't necessarily. I guess I mean, So how, like the U.S. opposing the International Criminal Court, some people would also say, hey, they're going to oppose anything that could hold, war criminals to account because they themselves could easily be charged. Now,
pish posh.
Okay. Why did they oppose it? Why did the Bush administration not want to join?
The Bush administration and a lot of Americans do not trust the studied judgments of the international community when they all get together with their robes in the Hague.
But why don't you explain? I mean, I understand there's differences. China and Russia don't
because it's
right.
All right, okay. I just don't trust the system as it is right now because it's going to bend over backwards to have representatives. If I would trust a system of free countries getting together and having some sort of body that tried to sort of identify war criminals and war crimes and so forth, and was realistic. And like anything else in the international community, it's got to include everybody.
Right.
Okay, I'm just saying that envoys of Chinese justice will corrupt it, as I said before, that the Chinese have an interest in holding the line and making sure a country like Zimbabwe was never going to be punished for stealing an election the way that Mugabe has.
But I will go. I totally agree with that. I mean, I actually think if we can go back to that Zimbabwe resolution,
or to make sure that a Sudan is never really punished for a little ethnic cleansing.
They didn't block the referral, and I think here's maybe the difference. One, there's a passage of time. Maybe they were just sleeping the day it got the Sudan got referred.
Right. They're too busy helping secretly the Iranians.
No, I mean, maybe this is maybe this is going to seem absolutely too wishy-washy, too wishy-washy for you, but. On the Zimbabwe one, I think that if the U.S.'s goal was to actually pass that, obviously they failed because it didn't pass. But if their goal was even to isolate China or Russia, it didn't work because neither was isolated. In fact, on the ground here, to the degree this is the ground at the UN, it's emboldened both to be like, fuck you. I think that actually, I think that's part of the reason that the U.S. didn't get any of its way on language last night is like there's kind of these guys are ascendant. Like they won on Zimbabwe. And I know that most people that hear us will say, yeah, they won for a terrible reason. But here's the thing. Maybe this is inside baseball being here. The U.S. could have prevailed on the Zimbabwe one. The reality is that Russia and China, it's true, and many of the countries in the UN and on the Security Council are not going to go with a resolution that gets the UN into the business of, from their point of view, second guessing, from our point of view, validating elections. But they were ready to condemn the beating up of the opposition and Morgan Tsvangirai's swollen face and people starving. Yeah. Okay. So the thing was, I mean, actually, and I don't know if the U.S. was just either ham-handed or cynically wanted it to make it look like we're good, they're bad. Right. If a resolution had not talked about election, I know that would have seemed strange to you, but if there had been two resolutions, right? It's like separating a vote. Vote on violence against opposition and starving your own people. Probably they could have gotten it through over the abstention of Russia and China, right? Mm-hmm. But by including the election thing, now it's a loser. So why did they do it? I mean, I don't know. And I like elections as much as the next guy. I'm just saying if you throw in get something, I think there's different ways to do. There would have been different ways to approach that one,
Well, yeah, we could. I kind of want to transition into, because there's a lot of strings there.
Sure.
I want to transition at this point into the following question. Okay, I think we've seen that the UN as an institution, because it is the sum of its parts, right, has done a very poor job of preventing genocides, right?
Sure.
All right, and we'd like that to be a pretty big thing that the UN does. I would add that as a citizen who enjoys life in the free world, I'd like them to do a good job of also stopping terrorism. Yep. If it'd be nice if we had a supranational group or an international kind of coalition that did a good job of stopping terrorism. And also, I would like the international system, or the sort of UN and the IAEA, to do a good job of stopping, particularly nuclear proliferation, and as it may result into terrorism. Mm-hmm. And all these really important issues that we could use a good international system that would be able to do anything for it. The UN has really failed. Okay, it has.
I'm not. It's actually funny that you've turned the tables. I'm certainly not. At least here, I'm not viewed as any defender of the UN system. But I want to say on the question of genocide, right?
Yeah.
So the largest one, maybe the one we're referring to, is Rwanda.
Right.
And if you really check that out, you'll find, and I'm not saying that the UN, if the U.S. hadn't behind the scenes been saying, we refuse to send any troops, don't even put it on the agenda. And this is all under, the Clinton administration, so it's not a partisan issue. But I will say, as much as anyone, in terms of the historical problems in Rwanda, France had a large hand by siding with one group against another. But in terms of when the actual genocide was taking place and a peacekeeping force, because this is a genocide done by guys with machetes, you know what I mean?
Right.
Literally, like, this is one that Blackwater could have solved. But even the UN could have solved it with an appropriate peacekeeping force of just like 7,000 people. Yeah. But in fact, while it was going on, the U.S. was adamant about not sending any further troops. Now, as historically, that's because it was right after Black Hawk Down, whatever you want to say. But I will say, I'm not a defender of the UN, but on this one, the
moral is that a few years later, Clinton said it was his biggest regret.
Right.
That gets to another issue.
And who did that help? The reality was, I just want to be clear on, the defenders of the UN here say, and they're right, it's just like when you say the UN, you got I don't want to get into all of it, but there's the Security Council, and you have to really blame the votes of the Security Council on the members. Or we can say, by this UN, we mean the system that gives 5 countries vetoes. I think that's a major problem. I don't know how they're going to solve it. It may be the downfall of
but also the accompanying, the guarantors, or at least technically, I guess you could say the UN is some ways, or the institutions of the UN, like the IAEA is a guarantor of the NPT, right?
Right.
The UN as the UN Security Council, because when they vote on a resolution, I guess it becomes technically international law.
Sure.
Right?
Under Chapter 7.
So the generator of international law. There's a lot of things you can get into. The UN is obviously kind of linchpin of the international system. My point is that I want an international system that can do a good job of stopping and protecting people from the threat of terrorism.
Sure.
That can do a good job of stopping rogue nuclear proliferation, and will do a good job of preventing genocide. And it seems like, the UN's got a lot of things it tries to do. Mm-hmm. It wants to stop global warming, and it wants to end world illiteracy, and it wants to do a lot of things, and that's all fantastic. You know what I mean?
Sure.
I'd like to buy the world of Coke.
Right. No, you won't. Don't. I can do an aside on global war. They're turning up the heat at the UN. Today was the first day in order to stop, they claim, greenhouse gases. So if you're not seeing me sweating, but it's actually heating up in here.
Really?
Yeah. This was a big thing. Actually,
by the way, isn't all the UN stuff on global warming really just that's really global socialism?
It's not that it's socialism. I just think it's I think, to be kind of cynical, Ban Ki-moon came in and because it was never, before under Kofi Annan, they didn't say hardly anything about it. It's sort of like he took it on as his issue. And as a cynic, some people say, he needed an issue. Yeah, absolutely. The timing was all right. But I will say, it's you'll like this, actually. I don't know your position on Fox News, but I just you'll see. I'm up
for them.
Okay, exactly. I'm a trees guy. We'll go back to the forest in a moment. Yeah. This very morning, this was the first day, 1st of August, that Ban Ki-moon is turning up the heat in the UN to save power. So they have a photo op, right? Mm-hmm. And in fact, a lot of the press turn out because it's kind of like Ban Ki-moon will be wearing short sleeves and no tie, go up and see him. So I came in no, I'm not kidding you. This literally was the way it was pitched. There was even talk about some officials would be in their, quote, national dress. You see what I mean? So there was a big, it was all very cutesy, and I think the UN, propaganda machine liked it because it was kind of a positive story. This is not about the UN wasting money in Myanmar with dictators. This is not about, this, right, which we'll get to, but this is about, short sleeves and native dress. So we get there. In fact, a lot of press came, and this is just, a self-serving aside. They try to not have me go up. They're like, you're not a television reporter. But I'm like, hey, I've got my camera. They're so anyway, I say I can take stills. We go up there. But this is the Fox part of it. Ban Ki-moon's at his desk. First they say, I just love this stuff. They say he's not going to talk. It's just photo op. So then the guy from CNN says, look, essentially, if you're not taking questions, we're not even going to cover it. Mm-hmm. Series of calls are made. He's going to take questions. Great, we go in. But they take us into the wrong room first, and the room is literally 55 degrees. It's incredible. It's next to his office. Then we go into his office, and it's hot.
It's nice. Oh, I see what you're saying.
And it's sweating.
But did they really turn up the heat in order? What is that supposed to mean?
No, they're not turning up the heat. They're using less power to the air conditioning. I actually went to the basement today and saw they use this brine solution that they pump through the building. It's totally archaic. They literally are taking water and pumping it up to they use Con Edison steam to in turn pump water up this 50-year-old building. But anyway, so Ban's at his desk. It's a little bit hot. He's sweating. But he gets asked suddenly, having seen the other room in the cold. The Fox reporter says, "What about this double standard in the heating of the rooms?" I'm not kidding you. And the microphone's in his face. What about the double standard, which is always like, this is what you call the third worlders. This is always their thing. Double standard. So it's like,
Right.
but now Fox is accusing the double standard. And he says, which wasn't that well thought out, he says, yes, sometimes my office gets very hot, and I have to go into the cool room next door. Well, this is not very good.
That's
because
wild.
The idea is like you're setting an example, but if you're setting, he's definitely operating with a safety net. If you've got the fucking,
Right.
excuse me,
Yeah.
again, the cool room next door.
Right.
So they haven't been able to argue this one away. I talked to the staff union. They're like, yeah, this guy didn't even talk to the medical service. And there's going to be like old ladies passing out. It's sort of like and the whole thing
Are you
is.
serious? And this is all like for global. Wow.
Oh, that's entirely. I can actually wait.
By the way, I think global
Here we
warming.
go.
I'm not saying it doesn't exist with the greenhouse gases and everything like that. And I'm actually for.
You won't see it, but I'm
raising
holding
awareness.
up cool UN.
I'm for raising awareness, but I mean, it just seems to me. All right. Wow.
So anyway, I'm sorry.
That's a great story,
that's
actually.
beyond for us. We're down into the twigs, but I'm clinging
Well,
to it because
can we get? But let's get back to the
Let's
bigger
get back.
question.
I agree.
Okay? There are some important things we'd like an international system to do.
Yep.
Right. And it seems like currently the international system can't do it. And here's my question:
Go ahead.
Why? Why?
I actually have an
and
answer.
I think I have an answer, but I want to hear your answer.
This may be overly broad, and I'm again,
Okay.
you're putting me in an uncomfortable position of it's
Right.
not a question of defending the UN. I was just thinking because I want to appeal to your. I don't know if it's natural law or kind of democratic or sort of
Yeah.
live free or die sense. You can only, I mean, I guess ideally, or
Right.
I think we'll both agree, you've got to govern with the consent of the governed. If you're going to create an international system that countries have to obey, they have to have bought into the system. Now, inevitably, to create
agreed.
No.
We're on the same page.
to create a
Matt Lee.
system that they're going to agree in, it's going to be a
Yes.
weak and screwed up system.
Right,
But,
okay,
But what's
good.
going to be, unless you're going to have a global system where there's like the 20 good countries and their Lockheed Martin jets are going to run the world the way they want it, which is sort of what we have in a way.
Yeah.
When push comes to shove, somebody's bombing somebody, and we've seen it, right?
Yeah.
But
yeah.
on the day-to-day basis, we pretend to have an international system, but you've got to get the people to agree. And so we Americans think that all our people are good, so if you create a good-sounding social compact, everyone will sign on. But most countries on Earth may or may not be that good. I don't think you think they're that good. But to get them to buy in, they're not all genocidal. To get them to buy
No, I
in.
know.
And number one, the other thing is that inevitably something like the UN is going to be it's a club of nation states. It's not a human rights body. It's not about the rights of individuals. It's a club of states. And what's the first goal of every state? To maintain its borders. I'm telling you, we can make fun of you. You're talking about sovereignty and
Yeah.
who is Bashir to talk about sovereignty. If the UN ever said you're losing Puerto Rico, you'd talk about sovereignty. So maybe they view. I mean, I don't want to make any analogies here but you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I guess I'm here enough where
I
it's
wouldn't
like,
have a problem if the Puerto Ricans voted, and they won't, by the way.
Okay.
But if they voted,
They don't.
People
I
of
know.
Puerto Rico voted, and they said
Sure.
we don't want to be part of a U.S. protectorate anymore. Go ahead.
Right.
Just like if
Kosovo.
if there was a referendum in Iraq that said Yankee go home, I'd be all right with that.
Right.
I'm
What
not.
if-
I'm
Well,
not.
why didn't you give them the right to a referendum before you went in? Yankee don't come. You agree with that?
Well, first of all, listen.
There was no way
you want
to
to go
know-
down this road? We can go down this
All right.
road.
Okay.
But Saddam Hussein was not the representative of the Iraqi
No, I'm not
people,
saying
and
that,
a lot
but
of
I'm
Iraqi
saying
people were like,
right.
"Yankee, come in and save
No,
us."
totally. But why don't?
Yeah.
I mean, we have intrepid pollsters. Why didn't you send the Harris group to undercover? Why don't we send
Wow,
pollsters
because there's a
into
million
Myanmar?
different issues right now. But anyway, I don't want to. On
Okay.
that one point, it's very hard to have polls in countries and societies where
Right.
the citizens
are
know
you-
that their phones are listened to,
Right.
and that what they say is never private. So in closed societies where I think polling is very difficult and
I
may.
acknowledge all of that.
All right.
I guess I'm
now,
wondering
but I want to get back to what you said though, right?
All right.
Aren't there some states like I don't know, the Islamic Republic of Iran, right? That, for example, Iran doesn't just sponsor terrorism, right? They've pretty much made terrorism the fundamental role of most states would in terms of their military, right? And terrorism is something that exists outside of international law and the international system. But their Revolutionary Guard and mainly their Revolutionary Guard is bigger than all of their other military by probably several orders of magnitude. It's very secretive. But my point here is that when you have states that kind of exist outside of the basics, and when I say basics, I mean consular agreements, right? Because states that sponsor terrorism often use their embassies as a base to sow terror, as we know, right? Then my question is, don't you kind of undermine the international system when you allow these kinds of states in it and treat them as if they're like everybody else?
No, I don't. I mean, I hear what you're saying. That I guess practically here at the UN, it's sort of like, so who is going to vote them out? You see what I mean? Who's going to vote them out?
Let's start a movement. I mean, like someone.
No, I know if you can. We
used to say that in the Senate.
Right.
Who's going to vote for the rights of black people in the South? Who's going to vote for their voting rights? But eventually, Democrats bucked the leadership of their party. Why can't states that are free, that have an interest, by the way, in this new era of not getting, having their shopping malls remain unexploded, saying, wait a second, we can't have these kinds of states in it. And by the way, Sudan's a big terrorist state too.
Tell me where Sudan today is sponsoring terrorism outside its borders.
Today, no, but I'm saying historically, if you go back 10 years, I mean, the UN condemned Sudan for trying to kill Hosni Mubarak.
No, but you're an intelligence guy, so I actually want to. We'll see where this goes, but I'm sure you've heard the strand in the Sudan Darfur story of, in fact, I mean, yes, Osama Bin Laden lived in Khartoum in like 1996, right?
Oh, right.
But the reality is, what many I say many people say, you're much closer to than me, that since 9/11, in fact, the U.S. has used Sudan for intelligence.
Yeah, I can get into that if you'd like.
I would like to hear about Osama's stay there, and I've heard that they know a lot about Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And so that this is one of the reasons that people like Williamson, and historically, although the U.S. thunders loudly publicly about Darfur and about South Sudan when it rears its head, that deep down they're to some degree they flew this guy Salim Ghosh to D.C. right? I'm turning it over to you. I want to hear what is that a legitimate trade-off?
Oh, it's absolutely. Everything you said is true. The CIA first went into Sudan in probably 2000, and they were as part of a counterterrorism understanding. And after 9/11, that the counterterrorism cooperation was very good. They turned over all their files that were historical on Al-Qaeda and Bin Laden. People who've seen them say that at the time that was very useful. We felt that we had a working relationship with, I guess the guy's nickname is Yahya, who is the deputy of their intelligence service. And I would say that over time that relationship has soured, not just because of the Darfur issue, but because they stopped giving the United States, stopped giving the CIA very accurate information.
Maybe they ran out of information. It's not like, right? I mean,
but I'm saying it's not just that, but the Sudanese have been suspected as, not playing a major role by any stretch, but certainly being on the wrong side in 2006 in Iraq, which and they've managed to get on the wrong side of the military, and now that sort of counterterrorism cooperation that was believed to have been very good with Sudan is largely now, most people say, is not as good as it was. Right. And I think that you could have seen it coming because, they are classic Islamic supremacist, scumbag regime.
But then why after they just did it after 9/11 because they were afraid of being attacked? So that's why they turned over the files? Why did they turn over the files?
I think they were a combination of being afraid of being attacked, right? There were some pragmatists in Khartoum who understood that it was going on 20 years of war with the SPLA, and no one was winning. And but ultimately, by the way, they kind of scuttled a lot of that as well. So
no, but you'd be surprised. I don't know.
Yeah, the lunatics always will in a situation like that. If you have reasonable people in a political system with lunatics who are willing to use violence, the lunatics almost will always win. We saw that in Eastern Europe after World War II, right? That people who acted in good faith as sort of social democrats lost out to communists, right? Because the communists were willing to assassinate people and do all kinds of nasty things, and were being, supported by the Soviet Union. So, I think that the same analogy holds in today's world, with these sort of Salafi, hardcore kind of caliphate types, will always sort of win out against pragmatists. If you don't have another force to balance it out.
I just wondered, have you seen, since you refer to the South Sudan thing, I mean, the Salva Kiir, currently the president of South Sudan, the sort of viewed as the successor or even heir to John Garang. He's not in favor of this indictment either.
He isn't?
No, he's not.
I didn't know that.
No, he's not. Right, he said it helps, that there's a process, whatever. I'm not going to, that's the position that's been expressed. Right. Which is kind of, I think, and that's sort of interesting, because I know that, the U.S., I know that when I was on the Security Council trip, we went down there, and they're like, the Western powers particularly, they're like, wow, Salva Kiir is like a photo op, a guy with this big hat and a walking stick and stuff, and it's like, their position is, I can't say, some people say it's that since they got this agreement to be able to have a referendum on breaking away from Sudan, in fact, if if Bashir is overthrown and his party, the deal is off. So they don't have any interest in actually regime change yet. They just want to follow through on a commitment that administration made to them. That's the cynic. And I think
by the way, South Sudan would be a landlocked, fairly miserable.
Totally. No, I know. I mean, absolutely. To tell you the truth, having Juba, their capital, there is not a single electrical wire going in there. Everyone has generators. There's no power. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
It's basically diesel is trucked in. They have no. It's not connected. And then I've read. I mean, you can. And I don't. This is history, but Sudan was run by UK and Egypt for quite some time as a condominium, they called it. Whatever.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know. I've read an analysis that says that during their time, not to blame everything on the colonists, but they did absolutely nothing to tie the two parts of the country together. And so it's true that this remains like a major problem. But they're also not tied, south to Uganda and Kenya or whatever. So they're really. It's hard to imagine. Some people say the same thing of Kosovo, that it won't be a state, but you're better off in Kosovo than in South Sudan, probably. Yeah.
Well, Kosovo's just going to join Albania, right?
Well, there's an issue. There's some issues there, but why don't you know what?
All right, you want to move on to Burma?
Sure, let's do it.
I refuse to call them Myanmar.
Okay, we can. I'm actually changed. It's sort of funny. I was until recently. I've been a Myanmar guy, but it's the more I've looked into what's going on there, I've got to go Burma.
Right, the good guys want to call themselves Burmas.
No, but I mean, yeah, exactly. But yeah, no, and I know that we had here's hat tip to the U.S. mission to the UN. They had, you would have been in your element, I think. They had a maybe about a week or 10 days ago. They had a lunchtime seminar of prisoners of conscience. Some of whom, there was a guy Burmese guy that had been locked up after a student protest, hung upside down in the dark. I mean, absolutely. And then others were sort of like family members or friends of. There was a woman from Eritrea who said a friend of hers, journalist, disappeared without trace in 2001. A guy from Uzbekistan, a Syrian. This is. I'll get you the documents because it was a pretty good show, and it was actually interesting.
Zalmay. I misjudged him. I over the years of the Bush years, I wrote some things about him that were critical.
Sure.
But
I don't know if I would attribute this event to Zalmay, by the way. But
you wouldn't attribute it to
I wouldn't.
Zalmay.
No. This is they do these. They had one under called Bloggers and Freedom. It's they have a huge staff at the U.S. mission to the UN. They I guess you can say he didn't veto it. I'm not sure if he's the sponsor of it.
I want to come up to New York and I'll hang out with our guy Benny Avni and you.
Sure.
Just kind of trail around and I haven't been to the UN in a while.
Yeah, you got to.
And just what I mean, just kind of soak it in. But the cafeteria, the whole scene, the post office.
The thing, I agree. The funniest thing about it is that last night, because it went late, after a while here, and it's who am I? But you get to know the Chinese ambassador comes out, he's like, hey, you want to, let's do a stakeout. And so I asked him. I guess to do it right here though, you can't. I mean, I think that's maybe the difference. It's just you got to have questions. You got to have. I'm not. You've done it longer, but. It's the degree, the Russian ambassador didn't talk, but I asked him this question about Kosovo, the UN mission in Kosovo not printing passports anymore, and he's like, he comes back hours later, and he's like, I've thought about what you asked, and here's my position. You take out your tape recorder, there you go. It's you don't even have to call anyone. So that's sort of, I'm not, whatever, that's just an aside to say, it's sort of insane, and
there's a lot of,
how it's run.
But let's talk about Burma.
Let's talk about Burma.
Okay, serious. Let me tell you something, you liberal internationalist viewers.
Oh, really? Oh, okay, good. Viewers.
Yeah, that's who watches Blogging Against Blogging.
All right.
You know that, right?
All right.
That, and there's a guy named, somebody, Abu Arlandi or something, who was saying, I don't know much about Africa, and guilty as charged. I don't know what's matter. Okay. But anyway, here's as I understand the story, right? We tried to help them after the cyclone, right? The world tried to help them. And what then happened to the money, Matt?
Okay, this emerged. It turns out that while everyone was focused on the idea of them not allowing quote international aid workers, this was the big issue.
Right.
And even and France actually brought up this idea of responsibility to protect and parked a warship off, they were going to bomb food in and. But the beneath it all, but the UN, Ban Ki-moon went.
A warship? No.
Say again? No, they do. Oh, they're setting up a base in the Middle East. You better watch out. They're getting spunky. No, they have it. Whether they would use it, but you know that they're building a base in, I don't know if it's Dubai or Abu Dhabi. I mean, France is, in some countries,
a real emerging military naval power.
Well, they bombed the rebels in Chad. I mean, when they fight Chadian rebels, they do pretty well. But
they're a scrimmage match anyway.
Definitely. No, it's fine. But at the UN, they did. they did an appeal for $200 and some million to consolidated appeal for Myanmar. In fact, there was a big Ban Ki-moon went and met with the leader of Myanmar, the dictator, the regime of Tan Shui, and suddenly a few visas were given, and the appeal was made for $200 million. And in fact, the UN has been saying of late that things, and I think it's true. People had expected like a big second wave of deaths due to disease, and it does appear that didn't happen. I'm not just saying factually. I'm not saying it. But here's the part that
get to the punchline, man. Come on.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sorry. I'm going out of my way to be fair. But the reality is
we don't want to be fair on blocking heads.
The reality is that the money is that Myanmar requires that all the money that comes in be converted through them. They have something called the Myanmar Foreign Trade Bank, and all the UN and in fact embassies, international organizations have to establish an account there. And you give them dollars, and they give you back something called a foreign exchange certificate. You can in turn change that into the local currency that's called kyat. The problem is the foreign exchange certificate they give you on a one-to-one basis for dollars is worth 75% of what a dollar is.
So they're taking
25%.
1/4 of the money that is intended for their ravaged country, that we're willing to help out, even though they're rogues that are working in everything from like the international drug business to not to mention like awful human rights abusers. Okay, even despite all that, the world still wants to help.
But here's the worst thing. Exactly.
Country,
here's number
and they're
one.
Still taking a cut.
Here's the outrageous part. So I mean, again, going overboard to be fair. What they claim is they say no. It fluctuates, and it's true. They're actually I've gotten to know several people in Yangon, Rangoon to you, who track these things, and it's clearly a scam for the government to take money. But at the time of the cyclone, a FEC was worth about 15% less than $1. After the cyclone, it grew to 25 or more. Some people say it's because the country was awash with aid dollars. In the event, they always had at least 15% built in, but it went up to 25. But here's the killer. So somebody that will remain unnamed clued me into this, and I looked into it, and it was true. I hadn't seen anything about it. The great thing, back to this, like praising the UN, like one day the head humanitarian here, John Holmes, is taking questions in front of the Security Council about, and I just said, so how do you convert money? Are you losing? He's like, I never thought of it. I've got to look into it. The next day he had to go to do a press conference and say, well, have you looked into it? His sidekick, the humanitarian coordinator of the UN for Myanmar, a guy called the humanitarian coordinator, he said there are no substantial losses. Okay. Now here's the thing. I've seen minutes at that time. I've seen but didn't have a copy of minutes of a phone call 2 weeks before I've asked the question of all the head humanitarians in
and they were all worried about it?
Saying we are going to raise the serious loss, 20% foreign exchange loss to the government. So maybe the UN, the part, it's two things here.
Hold on. You got minutes.
Yes.
First of all, as I said before, Encyclopedia Brown, that's some work.
No.
So you got minutes of the secret phone call with the humanitarian people, and they're all worried about this.
That's
and
correct.
then they come out in the press conference, and they're like,
totally.
No biggie.
Yep. And in fact, it's the minutes. The minutes themselves show them planning a second round appeal. After the $200 million, they came back on July 10th and asked for $300 million more, which is Myanmar's in trouble. You need money. But here's the thing: they didn't disclose. They already knew that they were losing 20% at that time. It grew to 25 after that. They knew in writing that they were losing 20% of every dollar that went in, and still in all, they came here and launched an appeal for $300 million with no disclosure. So to me, that's like a crime. That's not, certainly if you did, a publicly traded company did it, you would go to jail. Now, what I've tried to get at, they've tried to say it's a very complicated issue.
Write that, honestly, are you allowed to freelance at Inner City? Write that for us.
Benny, your guy Benny wrote it up after John Holmes ended up admitting it, and he did say, as first reported by Inner City Press. The thing about it is that the question becomes they were losing money well before the cyclone. They've tried to now sort of minimize the damage by saying, look, things happen in a chaos, but now they've actually one of them was quoted today saying, we didn't know until it was raised by an investigative blogger. You'll find that on Fox News today. So that's I'm supposed to then say, oh, thanks, But the reality
they don't mention your name?
No, they do. They do, actually.
They must think of you a little bit like the Unabomber, right?
Yeah.
Because you're like just out there
right.
doing stuff. You don't know. They can't get a moment's rest.
Right. No, but this is great. What's good is, again, also, I'm sure you see it. It's like these, people, that's also what's good about the Internet. It's like the UN is all over the place, but people that work for them anywhere in the world
can see. That's a scandal, by the way. I read it when you said it to me before. Yeah, I'm outraged.
Yeah, but to me, it's also, the thing is that they're
for conservatives, the lesson here is not necessarily and I would agree with you that there's a lot of problems with the UN, but the lesson here is that the regime matters. Whereas if you're trying to help, people who've been ravaged by a cyclone, it matters that, the regime can, of course, impede the delivery of that aid.
No, but I blame also, they can impede it, but if you accept it. Here's the thing that bothers me. There is no evidence that I've seen that prior to, that the UN system tried to resolve it. Do you see what I mean? Now they are. Now they say they're trying to find a way to resolve it. I've heard from people the way it's being resolved is just a temporary fix. Basically, the government is saying people can pay for more things using FX, which in turn makes the value go up. So now the spread is down to 17%. I asked the guy Holmes, the head humanitarian, what percentage loss is okay with you? Mm-hmm. And he's like, I'm not here to say numbers, but 1% would be one thing, but and it's like, so what? And the thing is, my whole thing is, this is the way I've tried to approach it. You have to disclose. You have to. If you don't, it's illegal, immoral, outrageous. And I think if you do disclose, no one's going to give you money if you say you're losing 20%. So it may be self-policing, right? But here's the thing.
That's a good story.
There's no evidence to me that they even said to them. And actually, maybe it's because I'm always looking for flaws among the self-described pure. All the energy that went in by, I hate to say it, France and other Western powers saying, you must let our Médecins Sans Frontières and our well-meaning, hippie youth, God forgive me, in. Right. Like the focus seemed to be more about getting like photo. I know that there's well-meaning people there, but this was a very concrete issue. This was very concrete, and they should have been able to say to Myanmar, look, we're going to give you there's a lot of money coming in, and inevitably this is going to redound to your benefit to oppress people in your country.
Right.
But we are not going to allow you to take 20% off the top. We're just not. And so we're either going to convert our stuff on the black market, or you're going to temporarily waive the requirement effect. And I believe, actually, I think that...
You think that would have worked?
I think the word worked. I think
no, they wouldn't. They would have let their people starve, because dictatorships do not care about their populations.
Why did they end up giving the visas? There was a leverage, and the question becomes, what's more important to you? Having your feeling that only Europeans can solve this problem, or actually...
I see what you're saying.
No, maybe you think it's wrong, but I thought there was a big aspect at the time. It's sort of like, deep down, and you would disagree with me, but Asia's a big place. It's what Myanmar ended up saying, just like, and you make fun of it all you want, Sudan's only comfortable with African peacekeepers. Myanmar said, we would like Asian aid workers. They started letting in without visas people from Thailand and ASEAN.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Now we could say, well, that shows they're corrupt. They only want their own kind or whatever. But the reality is, hey, there's like 5 billion Asians, right? We don't have any Asian humanitarian workers. It has to be like, World Vision and Bernard Kouchner? I don't think so. And even those groups actually have local hires. So it's all but it just seemed, some part of it seemed very kind of pompous and like, we are the humanitarians. I know we may both, it's not to put down France as a country, but the foreign policy was like...
This has been a pretty anti-France, and it's funny because I like Sarkozy, obviously.
Sure.
So I want to say that. And I also like Bernard Kouchner a lot, but it's kind of been an anti-France... kind of blog. And it's funny because I'm in Philadelphia right now, my parents' house.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
My mom.
Go ahead.
She teaches French.
Drum roll. Oh.
Or she taught French for years.
Is this a confessional?
No, my mom. I'm just saying she's very much of a Francophile. But here I am doing a Blogging Heads.
It's just we've just run into it. We've run into it.
Right.
I guess it's and again I'm saying it's because I actually have run-ins with their mission all the time because I think it's because they hold themselves up. They're very like the rights of man. They act like...
No.
And then you see Chad, whatever. At the same,
delicious cheeses.
Right. But I do... And actually, and then this is where...
And by the way, the U.S. intelligence relationship with the French has been excellent since 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an interesting thing, by the way, because there's some people talking about, actually back to the ICC question,
sure,
of U.S. officials to the ICC, like Don Rumsfeld or something like that. Well, if you're going to go down that road, I find it fascinating that the European press and European human rights groups never talk about the government officials who agreed at the time and still support the black sites in Europe, right?
Mm-hmm.
We never hear that side of the story.
Right.
It's all Rumsfeld and Wolfowitz.
Right. Well,
Isn't that interesting?
I'm saying right. I'm not sure. I guess it seems like who are these black sites supporting European politicians?
All of them.
Really?
They make it. It's not just Eastern Europe, by the way. It's all of them,
okay,
and they also, by the way, rendition people to those sites. the Europeans were on board in this whole thing. They just want to keep
I don't.
secret.
Yeah, well, that I don't disagree, but it does seem like it's pretty. It's the people are not happy with it, and then you have maybe it's
the
hypocrisy.
European people. Of course, they're not happy with it. They're not happy with anything that would actually make them more secure. Right.
All right. They're more highly evolved. I don't even know. I don't know where to go on that one. I just like. I mean, what bothers me is when they're saying one thing and doing another. In terms of like, that is it more highly evolved to say that people shouldn't? I mean, think of. I don't know. If you may think that you'd never be in a position where you'd be picked up without charge and disappeared for 6 years, but if you were such a person, you would think the due process was a good thing, And I think they could do
and in
a little
those
more
cases,
due process.
I want the legal system to redress their grievances.
Right.
That was absolute scandal what happened in Mahar.
Okay.
So I'm not. By the way, it's a reason why an intelligence partnership with Syria is not such a great idea, but. We can move on, but don't get it twisted, Madly.
Sure.
I'm just saying that there are all kinds of black sites in Europe that the European governments and the EU agrees and knows are there, right?
Mm-hmm.
There was one, I think, or there's one investigation into it. But I'm just saying it's interesting. We never hear about the European officials who clearly at the time agreed to this stuff.
Right. No, well, then blame. I was going to say your people. I mean, I would say that the proponents of this type of behavior, they need to name names. It's not like they're that diplomatic.
They don't need to name names. I mean, anyway, that's the point. Anyway, It's not about naming names. I'm just saying that there was a lot more buy-in on this thing from other governments than is sometimes alleged.
Right.
It wasn't like the mad scheme of 7 people in the U.S. in the Bush administration.
Just on this whole currency thing, the only thing I want to say is that, as you might imagine, that Myanmar's not the only country where this takes place.
Of course.
And so watch this space, as they say. You know? And it's amazing. In fact, I think I'm trying to give the UN if their claim is that they didn't know it, this is an opportunity for them to say, gosh, let's look at our currency exchange practices across the range of places where we spend, in some cases, billions of dollars a year, and disclose the countries where we've been getting ripped off and come up with a plan to solve it. Somehow I feel like it's not. They've now told me I have to go one by one to each part of the UN. Go to peacekeeping, go to humanitarian affairs, go to the UN Development Program, which handles the money in all these countries. And it's absurd. Like, in banking regulation, it's like consolidated supervision. It's just, this is like a setup. I don't want to say it's like BCCI, but it's a setup where nobody's ultimately in charge.
Very similar to that, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say
it's actually almost exactly the same, now I think about it.
No, really? Yeah, you're looking at the political aspect. I'm looking at the bank regulatory aspect, where there's nobody ultimately in charge of anything. And so I'm trying to handle that job, Eli. That's what I'm saying.
I know. Well, anyway, Godspeed.
Yeah.
This was a good dialogue.
All right.
Do you want to just end it by saying something nice about the French?
Oh yeah. Well, you're a music guy. Name one French music.
Oh, that's not where you're going to say something nice about Chopin, right? But no, that's not.
Okay. No, I have to leave it to you. I mean, here's one thing I can say. At the end of last night's Security Council meeting, long after 11 p.m., the French mission called. First, they put out a statement. I mean, it was a little misleading. Anyway, they gave a statement today. In an official position on the Myanmar thing. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I can talk to the country. I can say the mission here is turning around. I mean, they have a lot of good things in the country. I'm just not. I mean, I think Sarkozy and Kushner are they have two different views of foreign policy. You say you like both of them. I don't know why that.
No, they're both very internationalist, and Sarkozy is it's a huge Zionist, by the way.
All right.
And Bernard Kouchner is also, he's a liberal internationalist, and I've had this conversation with Heather Hurlburt and others, but I see neoconservatism as the kind of realistic version of liberal internationalism.
So say something nice about France, Eli. I'm putting it on.
I am going to say something nice about France. I can say a lot of nice things about France.
Sure.
The Rights of Man is a very good idea. The original encyclopedia, Diderot. I think that there's a lot of wisdom in Candide by Voltaire.
There we go. Pantagruel.
I could do without some of the existentialism, but Sartre was a very good novelist.
How about Georges Bataille? Do you know Georges Bataille?
No, I'm sorry. I don't.
Okay, sorry. He wrote the general economy of spending. He was also a crazy novelist, and I think he may have killed one of his spouses. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah, very French.
Right. And then there's just wonderful French food and different kinds of French food.
All right.
From the profiterole to snails and butter.
All right.
Great dialogue again, Matthew Lee.
Okay, no, I'm sorry. I feel I don't want to frustrate you by not going forest enough, but there's a lot of trees.
No, but next time we need to kind of get. I want to try to pin you down on this question of the sovereign equality for states that are threatening everybody else.
Right. No, I'll try. I'll think that one through.
USA.
The problem is I'm dealing. It's actually it's a conflict. I don't know if you ever. Do you ever? And I think this is an okay topic to end with. Do you feel a conflict between I mean, I think you can like the idea of opinion in journalism. I'm not really hung up on it. I think as long as an article has new facts in it, you're perfectly free to reach a conclusion. But I am, I guess, being based here and having to deal with with a range of states all the time. Like I have wherever the facts take me. So like the Lockheed story, the U.S. didn't like it, but then I'll look into a Sudan story, they don't like it. That's fine. But I don't like. I actually am holding myself back, even in this format, from just making sort of sweeping statements about like. I guess as long because
no, I agree, and I don't want to make sweeping statements either.
No, there's nothing. But there is a place for it. I just wonder whether journalists are in a conflicted situation from actually even saying what they think, not because of some like weird ethical thing, but because it's not like you're trying to hide what you think. It's just like you have. I think one thing, and I do. It's nice to have a philosophy. But if you're a reporter, you have to sort of start each day fresh, or you have to.
Can I sum this up? What you're trying to say, and I totally agree with this, right? That it's okay to have an opinion. In fact, the more you know about something, the more likely you're going to have an opinion about how things are, right?
Yep.
So, of course, I try to, you know where I'm coming from.
I know where you're coming
viewer and reader, right?
Sure.
But I think that the difference between myself and someone who's just a columnist, right, and yourself as well, because you certainly have ideas and opinions as well, is that we try to keep at the forefront of our mind Socratic ignorance, which is to say that we know what we don't know.
Right. Okay.
And that's the difference. Journalists know what they don't know. Columnists and polemicists think they know everything.
Gotcha. But it's a finer point I'm trying to make, which is that as long as you're still in a way in journalism, in regular journalism, not opinion, in a way, I mean, I guess after a time, obviously your views are known, and so it is what it is. But you know what I mean? But like, I still think you have to like be. I mean, I guess because they really are. They're different. It's not to say like every story has two sides. You may not even agree with that, but there are certainly ways. I guess you can accept, for example, that al-Bashir has done terrible things. That doesn't mean that every argument that Sudan puts forward. Like they made an argument about the U.S.'s hypocrisy of not being in the ICC and having a veto, and I haven't seen it rebutted. I mean, it is what it is. That doesn't mean you should get away with crimes, but you can't just say, well, screw the argument because the person making it, sucks. I don't agree with that.
I do, yes, I totally agree with that. You should always try to read the people who you're going to disagree with most. That's how you. All of what you said is good. Anyway,
it's probably way too moderate, but okay, we'll pick up.
Anyway,
maybe on music next time.
For the viewers who watch this, I hope you enjoyed it.
All right.
And anyway, good.
It sounds like I didn't hear your nicotine frenzy behind it, so that's all to the good. You're cured.
I'm smoking. You know what I'm doing? I'm smoking a cinnamon stick.
Okay.
And let me tell you what a cinnamon stick is. It's not a cigarette.
Right.
But that's what I got to do. All right.
Cool.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.